Good morning. This is Sandy Conkar. Welcome to Surviving the Diagnosis. It's happened to all of us. Uh, Peggy, good morning.
Good morning, Sandy, and everybody that's tuning in. Very excited to be with you today.
Yes, we're going to continue our conversation from last week around honoring the Nurses Month for the month of May. And Peggy and I were just having a pre-show chat on uh, for the nurses, getting the different perspectives of what the nurses are required to do, staying in the box, and also from the perspective of the patient and the caregivers of understanding what guidelines that they have to follow. But just to give you a little bit of background on myself, if you're new to our show, I'm Sandy Conkar. I'm founder of CaregiverSanity.com. I've been a caregiver for over 4 decades, though I more easily relate to the roles of wife, mom, daughter, and friend. And the diagnosis, whether it's cancer, it's spinal cord injury, you've been told that you have migraines, you have MS, you have leukemia, um, you have a broken leg, you have received a diagnosis. Even if you have a stomach ache, you have a diagnosis. So whoever is around you and yourself, we've all been affected by this news and the roller coaster of emotions that we all experience from time to time. Sometimes we experience them at the same time, and that can get a little hairy. So it's always good to uh, open up the conversation lines between your family and friends and the person who's been diagnosed. And we've talked on the show, Peggy's, I think it was back in February, when about the three P's of diagnosis, the pre-diagnosis, the present diagnosis, and the post-diagnosis. And I think because of honoring the nurses today, again, and this month, is we're really looking at the present, the second P of diagnosis, the present diagnosis. And so I'd like to also mention before we get started about our disclaimer that any exercises or things that we do here on the show, we do, or our guests that we have on the last Friday of each month, if you move forward listening to us and following with us, you're in agreement with our disclaimers, which are at the bottom of our website, survivingthediagnosis.com. And again, you are listening to Surviving the Diagnosis. It's happened to all of us. And if you'd like to get reminders of the shows and what's coming up, what our discussions are going to be, go over to survivingthediagnosis.com. Simply opt in for the friendly reminder. You'll get two emails from us each week. One on Monday morning about 8:45 that tells you, just a friendly reminder that the show's starting at 10. And the second one is the link to the replay along with a little bit of what we're going to be talking about the following week. So we don't inundate you with emails, but because Lord knows our emails inboxes are really full. Occasionally we will have special announcements, so you will get that from us, but we will keep that in check as best we can. We do want to serve you as well with great information. Um, and Peggy, is there anything, obviously, introduce yourself, let everybody know.
All right, thank you, Sandy. Yes, let's see. I'm also a wife and a mother and a grandmother, and I was diagnosed with a terminal illness almost 9 years ago today. And I have been fortunate enough to have gotten 9 years almost of life back. And I just want to say that my life mission now is to help people suffering with cancer and their caregivers that take care of them, because they're all affected by this diagnosis. That said, I'm also a registered nurse. Um, I don't know, I think 32 years that I've been one. And I worked in the hospital in OB and high risk OB, so we did have our share of trauma. We had very, very good outcomes as well because we had a huge staff of perinatologists and um, uh, baby doctors that were just supreme. They were just so good. So when we're going to talk about nurses today, I want you to keep an open mind that there are situations in the hospital that while you may think she or he at your bedside doesn't acknowledge your needs in a certain area, um, whether it be administration, whether it be the facility, whatever. But while you're working in a hospital as a nurse, you have an obligation to have allegiance to that facility. But I want to say not to compromise, not in any way to compromise your patient. I myself have gone above and beyond because of situations where I thought my patient was in danger. And every nurse has that right to do that. But whether they do it, whether they don't, we're going to discuss all that today. So I'll hand it back to you, Sandy.
Okay. I think I wanted to, one of the things that we were talking about before the show started was uh, the box that nurses are in. And I think it's a good starting point for today's discussion because, we as the patient or the caregiver, if we walk into the emergency room or we are uh, coming into to well, the emergency room or the caregiver is walking into the patient's hospital room, um, we're coming from the street. We're coming from everything that's been going on in our day up to that point. And if we see something that isn't just so in our mind, some people have a tendency of, why hasn't this been done or why hasn't that been taken care of? So I think that there are certain guidelines that nurses have to abide by, whether they like it or not. I mean, that's for our medical field to run, the Western medical field, the hospitals to run the way they do, they have to have strict guidelines. I mean, it's huge, and it's important to have structure, but at the same time, how can the nurses relate to you on a more personal level and let you know that they understand how you're feeling, truly understanding how you're feeling? Um, because when they have the chart, I'll reference one time when my husband was in the hospital, and it was like they they knew what needed to be done, but they weren't doing it because it was outside whatever the doctor wrote down on the chart. And so it was like, well, we have to wait until we talk to the doctor. Well, that was 4 or 5 hours later. And so I was obviously getting a little irritated. And this was before the emotional release work that I do now. And I know that they were going to discharge him. And I said, you're not discharging him because I was told the doctor has to see him before he's discharged. And so they just didn't seem to have, the left hand didn't seem to know what the right hand was doing. And but yet at the same time, they didn't they there was that void of understanding and care. It was like I don't know how else to explain it. It was like they couldn't do anything. And I was upset and I wouldn't sign the discharge papers. So I don't know how we can get this relationship between the people on the floor and the patients and caregivers to be a little bit more uh, open in communication so that we don't get angry. And that's where EFT and with the work that Peggy and I do is working with the caregiver and the patients and the family members and
Yes.
friends is bringing down that anger, that intensity around the situation. So if you're in that situation again, and sometimes I know we don't all stay in the hospital that long anymore. Seems like that's in and out, but for the ones that are in for long periods of time, it's very helpful to use a technique that will help reduce that intensity so that when you do walk into that room and you don't see something just right or something you know should have been done isn't done, instead of being getting upset and yelling or coming at the staff in uh, a non-friendly way, um, the work that we do helps with that.
It
So
does.
Peggy, I don't know really what, maybe you can have some suggestions of what would be ideal that a patient or a caregiver, a family member can do, or how can they approach the situation when there's something that they don't think is done that was done correctly or in a timely manner.
Um, First of all, it comes right down to communication, Sandy.
Hmm.
Um, you want to be able to think that you can approach a busy nurse, and you should be able to. Um, I will just suggest that people are people, and sometimes they don't communicate in an optimal way. Nurses are people too, and you have people that are a little less tolerant than others. Um, their workload does put a stress and a strain on them to where they aren't as friendly, some of them. There is a term out there, and that's compassion fatigue, where some nurses are experiencing that, and the lay people might call it burnout.
Hmm.
Um, so that said, there's no excuse for a nurse not to be uh, present and available for her patient and their caregiver. There's no excuse. Uh, you know, it's first and foremost what a nurse is. I mean, not only dispensing medication and starting IVs and assessing wounds and dressings and all that other stuff that nurses do.
Hmm.
Uh, they are first and foremost compassionate, or should be. So, in my opinion, if you address your family member's nurse or your nurse, and you get cut off in mid-sentence or anything, no excuse, no excuse. There are steps to take that if the family member does get upset, there are steps to take. There, the surveys that are handed out, um, the ombudsman in the hospital, there are steps. The nurse manager of the unit, you can always go to them with your complaint because, again, there's no excuse to be cut short or to be um, abruptly cut off of communication or ignored. No excuse.
And we have mentioned before, there's that, it's posted, isn't it, on the walls of all the hospitals, the patient's Bill of Rights.
Right?
Yeah.
Correct. It's in every hospital, should be. Patients' uh, pain management bill of rights is another document that, when you say you have pain, who's going to say you don't?
Hmm.
Especially the nurse.
Hmm.
She has ways of assessing your pain, and you should be taken seriously. and relieved of your pain.
And I mention that because when you are in an emergency situation, you don't think of that. You know, you see things on the walls, but you're concerned about your loved one if you're the family member that just came walked into the hospital with them. You're not looking at the at the wall and reading things. So it's good to know that you have that right, and it is good to know that you have steps that you can take when you are in a calmer state of mind as well. And one thing that I did when Keith had his motorcycle accident was I just bought a notebook, and I it was like a little 3-ring binder, and I that was my Bible. I wrote down doctors' names, phone numbers, emails, who they were, what their position was, uh, the caseworker. He was assigned a caseworker on the floor as soon as he was moved from the medical floor to or ICU to the rehab floor. I had all the ICU names, and I'll tell you, probably 2 or 3 years after the accident, I had to refer back to that what do you call the 3-ring binder, and because I could not remember for the life of me the people's names, and had I not had that information written down, um, it would have been next to impossible to find out some information that we were searching for, because staff changes from hospital, from time to time, and the people that were there that I had become closer to and had a closer relationship with them. And I mentioned him last week, his one RN. She was no longer at the hospital a couple of years later. So it was very beneficial. Even if it's just a day, grab a piece of paper. If you don't have it, ask the nurses station for it and start writing down names and contacts. I even had the names of the nurses that helped him on the light gate, which helped him. They got him up on and walking, moving his legs. Though he wasn't walking, it was just for movement and getting him out of the bed. So that is a piece of like a tool to make sure that you have available to you. It's really important to write down that information. And prescriptions, that's the other thing, well, I even have to ask Peggy several times, okay, can you repeat that medical term or whatever? Because it's a whole different language. And I stop for a second, and if I don't know how to spell it, I just write it out the way I think it sounds, and put down what it is, and that way I don't have to think about it. Um, it's a lot like when you're taking care of your parents and they live out of state, or a friend. You write down where they go to work, where they bank, where they get their hair cut. So in that emergency, you have that information, and even
Sure.
afterwards. So
Yeah. That's a great thing to do, Sandy. Um, Make notes if you're a patient and you can't, or you're just kind of discombobulated about what's going on. And that's not a medical term, by the way. But have an advocate. Have an advocate at your bedside. I have been an advocate for many friends, many colleagues, many family members, and it's very important because I can imagine sitting there and maybe not having everything explained to you when it's normal jargon for the hospital. Well, you don't live in a hospital like we do,
mhm.
and it's the terminology of the day. No, so you do need to write it down and ask for clarity. And I must comment on the fact that you did take notes, and that's very good, and got names and what have you.
Mhm.
On the other hand, you may have come across nurses that got oh, defensive about your note taking and questioning, and there's no excuse for that. And like I said, a good nurse understands. A good nurse will help you clarify terms and help you understand what the doctor just said that left the room.
Hmm.
Because frankly, I guess we're all, well, I'm not that much anymore, intimidated by the white coat.
Hmm.
She comes in, and with the sense of urgency and hurry, and any other human being can pick up on that. I mean, we're very sensitive to nonverbal communication. Everybody is. And if they're displaying urgency and I have to hurry and I have to do this and my office is opening, and you're not going to ask your questions because you want to be a good patient. And there's no excuse for that, for them to present that way to you. So therefore, your greatest ally when you're in the hospital is your nurse, because she's assigned to you. You are her responsibility from the time she comes on her shift to the time she leaves. And believe me, she probably takes you home with her, which I did a lot of times, and I know nurses that have. But she is your liaison. And if you are not getting what she should do for you, you can either tell her, and that's a real good way of handling it. Hey, you're not meeting my needs. You're not answering my questions. Um, what did the doctor just say? Um, so you form a very strong bond with your patients, and a lot of times the same nurse will follow the same patient the next day, and that's called continuity of care. And I understand in OB, it's hard to do that. If somebody comes and has a baby in 8 hours, boom, you're gone to the postpartum floor, or if it's a birthing unit, you're taking care of her again. In the ER, it's turnover, turnover, turnover. But continuity of care is very important in nursing. So you are with that patient several times in their stay. So you get to know them. You know exactly, what they need, what they want. You talk to them, and you can also request them if you're in the hospital and you had an exceptionally good experience. Request that nurse again. Just tell the charge nurse or whoever is uh, in the nurse manager office that you would like that same nurse. So there are ways of handling your relationship with your nurse.
Oh,
But
so you can
again,
request that, huh? I didn't know
pardon me?
that. I didn't
What?
know you could request your nurse.
Yes, you can.
I'll be
Yes, you
darned.
can. Yes, you can.
Well, see, I learned
Uh,
something new today.
yeah, well, and if she's back on the floor, yeah. Um, I don't know about overtime. A lot of hospitals are really cutting back on that sort of thing right now, but also request her again if you can.
Mhm.
It doesn't hurt if she's off and she can come in and they can pay her. So, yeah.
Interesting. Very
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a little bit ago, you mentioned uh, about well, I just drew a blank. Hmm.
Here's a technique to help you remember. Put your thumbs in your temples, put
Yep.
your fingers right there.
There we go.
We have all these good things to do. I wish I had all
Mhm.
this when I was working in the hospital. My goodness, I'd have all my patients tapping and meditating, and it would have been beautiful. But
And I
like,
think that more and more, I think that the tapping is starting to be. recognized more and more as a very useful tool. And
Yes.
that was the thing that I was trying to remember was that you mentioned nurses burnout, and the burnout comes, wouldn't you say, with because just the anger and the frustration that you want to do more, but you can't seem to do more, and you take it home with you, and when you go home, you have a family probably, you know, and if you don't have, maybe you have pets. I mean, you have responsibilities when you get home. So, but you've brought your work home with you too. It's not just a 9 to 5 job, and well, I don't know if that exists anymore, with all of the communication available to us now, where people expect us to be on call 24/7. But there was a time that you'd go home, and then you focused on your family, or you focused on your responsibility. So my question is, what do you think is would be one of the number one things a nurse would really wish that they could work on emotionally to help them start their day or go into their next day much more calmly or freer
Mm,
feeling?
yeah, that's a good question. Before I answer that, I want to let people know that you are watching Surviving the Diagnosis. It's happened to all of us, and you're right now you're watching me. My name is Peggy Mangan, and Sandy Conkar is my co-host, and she's waving at you right there. So anyway, what can a nurse do to prepare to be the most receptive, compassionate person she can be when she goes into that patient's room? Well, I would suggest tapping. I would suggest working on your stuff, and that's jargon that Sandy and I use. It's not necessarily a hospital terminology, but working on your stuff. That means if you have angers, if you have resentments, if you were treated poorly, which nurses are a lot of times, very poorly sometimes. Um, but if that happens, then you can tap on it. You can go home and do what it takes to clear your energy of that situation. I would do that before work. If in my car, I used to drive for an hour. If I had known about it, I've been out of the hospital for several years since I've been sick, and it's just not recommended for my situation in my life right now to have that amount of stress anymore. It is stressful. Nurses go through a lot. Nurses go through losing their patients, not only their patients, patients, but their patients. They're frustration. And you need to work on that, ladies who are gentlemen who are watching this. You really need to work on it, and that's why Sandy and I are putting together another component to our Surviving the Diagnosis show. We want to work for you, the professional caregiver, and that's also a part of our membership that you can join. Um, and it's a very minimal amount of money for a month. And you get Sandy and I, and you get all kinds of resources on how to tap and tapping scripts. And she and I work with you as mentors um, every every other Thursday. Is that it,
Well,
Sandy?
it's the first Tuesday of every month,
Oh,
and
Tuesdays.
and the third Thursday of every month. So
Yeah.
it's bi-weekly that we get together as a small group on Google Hangouts. Excuse me, one second. Sorry about that. Um, yeah, we get together those 2 times live on a call. anywhere between 60 to 90 minutes, so you can come in and out as your time allows. But it's working on your stuff, and um, we all have stuff. We all have issues, and that's why where you hear Peggy and I reference the roller coaster of emotions. One day you might be up and you're there to be supportive of the rest of the group, and other days you might say, you know, I lost two patients yesterday, or I lost a patient, or I felt that I couldn't do more for my patient. Um, I felt bad that they were going through this. So these are the things that you'll come to the groups with, and we will work on them. So um, what happens when we do the tapping is that it awakens you to different scenarios and possibilities and clarity. It calms the brain, different areas of the brain, the hippocampus, it's the pineal gland, it's the amygdala, you know, all of these areas, and it puts off the good feeling hormones, and uh, just helps you re-energize yourself. And you can there's ways that you can do it inconspicuously. I mean, if you're walking from one room to the next to see one patient to the next, like Peggy has shown us, you can press there's acupressure points on each of your fingers on the side, right in line with the cuticles. And,
Yeah,
you know,
you don't have to tap.
you don't have to tap, but you can very lightly. You can hold it, you know, just pick one and hold it. Each acupressure point has emotions attached to it. It has um, the chakras attached to it. All the energy work that you hear people talking about, as Peggy and I do, but they're all related to the acupressure points. So if
Uh-huh,
there's once you find that what works best for you, then that's where you would kind of like your go-to point. A lot of
uh-huh,
people will their go-to point is their kidney 27, their collarbone point, right here at the base of your neck. You can just hold that, or you can like rub that if you want, if you didn't want to tap on it. Gently rub on it, and that releases some of that immediate uh, stress and elevated intensity. So, you know, this portion of the show, we like to do a tapping around a certain emotion or situation. And what we talked about doing was for the nurses, and this can also help the caregivers and family members. One of the statements was that we came up with was, I wish I could do more, or fear of, well, I wish I could do more is one. And then nurses sometimes feel that they may have a fear of losing their job if they go over the head nurse, or they go to the CFO at the hospital, or they, you know, go even further to say, look, at my patient needs this and I'm not being heard. So when you have that nurse who's the advocate, they take home that frustration, and you know, what could I have done more? I wish I could have done more. And so it just is a continual recording of I didn't do enough. So we thought that we would, uh, and that right there could be a global issue for anger. It could be a global issue for frustration. So I don't know which one would you suggest we maybe focus on at the moment, anger or the frustration? What do you think, Peg?
Um, well, okay, I just want to add that sometimes you're mad at administration
Mm-hmm.
because staffing is too thin. Um, that was my biggest frustration on a daily basis uh, toward, toward the end of my career. Nursing really got in a bad, hospitals got in a bad way, actually, and they were cutting, 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 trying to stay afloat. And some decisions are made that shouldn't be made by people that shouldn't make them. And cutting staffing was a huge mistake in many areas. They lost good nurses. Um,
I think they did that across the country. You know, I remember that where there were a lot of nurses that lost their positions.
Lost and left.
Hmm.
There are a lot of nurses out there that just said, I can't take this. And what they couldn't take is being able to uh, work and treat your patients as you were taught safely.
Hmm.
And sometimes it is not safe for the nurse. I'm just saying that they can lose their license if something untoward happens. Say, for instance, if they're in charge of a unit and they not only, you know, on a daily basis have their patients, but they're not given patient care usually, but they have every patient on that unit. It's their charge to make sure that patient gets taken care of well. And there's just so many things that contribute to a nurse's frustration. I used to go home crying after some days um, that I felt I didn't have the opportunity to work like I know I should. My standards, I was just cut too thin. And
Hmm.
that's very, very stressful for a nurse. So how about we do that?
On burnout or
Mm,
frustration?
yeah, frustration, not having enough time to do the kind of job that your standards are, your personal standards.
Okay.
There's many corners that can be cut, but there are personal standards that many, many nurses adhere to. And when you can't perform in that capacity, it's extremely frustrating.
And this will tie in nice because the caregivers themselves get frustrated that you know they they don't have enough time. They have too much going on, and so that would probably tie in nicely for both of our groups of the audience, not only the professional caregiver, the caregiver, and all involved.
Right?
Um, so what I my screen is not. I'm not able. I was going to do the screen share of the tapping points, but my screen isn't cooperating. So at the moment, and so I don't. Just give me 1 second because I'd like to try and pull
Sure.
that tapping diagram up. So
You go ahead.
mhm.
Yeah, I will jabber at them. um, we would love to have comments, positive, negative, something we can address so we know where you're at. And if you're out there looking, listening, um, please leave us a comment on Facebook, or if you are in our audience that has signed up, you can do it right here on our screen. Um, However, Facebook, Surviving the Diagnosis, is our page, and you can go there, and you can even like us if you want to.
Mhm.
But you can leave your comments,
Mhm.
and we look at that, and we will get back with you. Uh, you can you can count on that.
Yeah, and if you'd like to, you can email us. It's hello@survivingthediagnosis.com. And I'm going to try here. I'm trying to bring this up so it's you get an idea. So here we go, Peggy. You let me know what it looks like to you
Okay,
and see if there we go. How's that?
good.
Okay, so everybody, this is our and this is this there's a little box in my way that is I can't seem to get rid of it. So it's the cause of all negative emotions is a disruption in the body's energy system. So When you're feeling something negative, I like to say it's residing in your body somewhere. And a lot of people will say, well, I'm just tense all over. So when that happens, what I want to suggest, and again, if you're driving, please don't follow along with us. Do that on the replay when you are at home, comfortable doing, in a comfortable setting. But you can look at the tapping points. We will do the shortened version. These are the original tapping points, and I like to always give a strong foundation. So if for whatever reason we are led to go to the thumb point, you know that there's a thumb point. So these are all the original tapping points. We will not be tapping on all of them, but and the one point that is not on the original tapping diagram is the top of the head point, and that is just Peggy. Since I'm screen sharing,
Yeah,
go
I'm
ahead.
showing them.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, you just kind of tap all around the crown of your head because there's so many meridian endpoints up there. And I had a client the other day that said, "Oh, I like that one," because
Mm-hmm.
it serves to calm you down. So
Yeah,
as does every tapping point.
well, that is your governing 20, governing meridian 20, and
Hmm.
it it's attached to all the meridians. It stimulates. So when you actually tap up there, you're also stimulating the other ones as well. But we start out with the karate chop point, and that's on the side of the hand,
Hmm.
on the outside of the hand between the little bottom of the little finger and the top of the wrist.
Yep,
So
I'm demonstrating right
okay,
here.
great. Okay. So what I want to do is have the listeners think of the frustration that they are experiencing, just overall frustration. And um, on a 0 to 10, how intense is your frustration right now? And that's a global issue. So we're just going to bring that intensity around that. We're going to try and shift that a little bit for you today. And just see where it resides in your body. And like I said, it may be all over. You may say, my whole entire body is affected. And what I'm going to invite you to do is to take in a really deep breath through your nose and then blow out. Release that air. And then just breathe normally. And then do that again. Breathe in and breathe out. And just take a second or two and just do a real quick scan from the top of your head all the way down to the tips of your toes. And just scan your body. See where that frustration lies. Is it a little headache that's starting, or maybe it's a big headache? Maybe your eyes are burning or they have heaviness in them. Maybe your jaw, your TMJs, your jaw joints are really tense. I have a tendency of holding my frustration in my jaw a lot, like because I'm gritting my teeth. Maybe it's in your shoulders, in your back, or your lower back. You don't feel that you're being supported, so your lower back is affecting you. And going down into your hips, maybe those are hurting because you feel restricted in moving forward in your life or in moving forward in what you want to do to best serve your patient or whether you're a professional caregiver or a family caregiver. And just make a mental note of that or even write it down. We invite you to designate a notebook for our shows for this purpose so you can record your progress. And then just write down where you feel that frustration. Peggy, where do you feel in that frustration?
Uh, in my back, Sandy, actually.
Okay.
Um, I usually don't hold it there, but I did notice that I have a backache right now.
Okay, is there any specific area in your back? Is it right side, left side, up, lower?
Um, lumbar, let's see, almost down to the bottom of your back, just where your jeans start.
Oh, okay. The belt line.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay. And so I'll ask you on a 0 to 10, that frustration that you're holding in your back, what would that be? A 10 being it's really intense, it really hurts, uh, it's really heavy, whatever the composition is of that, of what you've noticed in your back, that frustration.
Thinking back on my frustration around staffing issues and that sort of thing,
Hmm.
it was a 10. It is a 10 when I'm thinking
Okay.
back about it.
Okay. All right. Good. And if you can put an emotion to it, I know we're working with frustration, but if you can put an emotion to the specific area of your back right now around the staffing issues, what would that emotion be?
Anger.
Okay. All righty. Good. All right. So hopefully the listeners have followed along and identified where they're holding their frustration. What maybe there's a specific issue, but you don't necessarily have to have that at the moment. And then put an emotion on that as well. So let's tap on the karate chop. And Peggy, just as always, if I say something and it doesn't ring true to you, definitely come in and say, nope, this sounds more like it. Okay?
I will, Sandy. Yes,
Great.
that's putting the words in your terminology, people. And sometimes we use words that don't resonate with you. So that's what
Yeah.
she's asking me.
Well, it's you maintaining um, your position because this is your healing, not mine. It's for you. I'm just the facilitator. So, so let's begin. Even though
Even though
I have all this frustration I'm holding on to,
I have all this frustration I'm holding on to,
and it's settling in my back right now,
and it's settling in my back right now.
I deeply and completely love and accept myself.
I deeply and completely love and accept myself.
Even though I have all this frustration I'm holding on to,
Even though I have all this frustration I'm holding on to,
and it's settling in my body.
and it's settling in my body.
Actually, it's been in my body for quite some time.
You're absolutely right. Actually, it has been in my body for quite some time,
Probably over 10 years.
most likely over 10 years.
I deeply and profoundly
I deeply and profoundly
accept who I am.
accept who I am,
Even though I have all this frustration I've been holding on to,
even though I have all this frustration I'm holding on to,
and it's showing up in my lower back today,
and it's showing up in my lower back today,
and it's around the staffing issues I experienced.
and it's around the staffing issues I experienced.
I deeply and profoundly accept who I am,
I deeply and profoundly accept who I am,
and I respect and honor these emotions.
and I respect and honor these emotions.
On the eyebrow point, right at the beginning of your hairline, this frustration and anger.
This frustration and anger,
Side of the eye, this frustration.
this frustration,
Under the eye, all of this frustration.
all of this frustration.
Under the nose, this frustration.
Ooh, this frustration.
On the chin point, remember that's in the indentation under your lower lip. All this frustration I'm holding on in my body.
All this frustration I'm holding on in my body.
On the collarbone point, all this frustration I have in my body.
All this frustration I have in my body.
Under the arm, all this frustration.
All this frustration.
And the top of the head point, all this frustration.
All this frustration.
Okay, I'd like you to take in a deep breath. Blow it out. And let's just tune back into that 10, just the frustration around the staffing issues. Has that
Uh,
shifted at all?
it's down to 8.
Okay. And how about the lower back, the lumbar area?
Actually, I have like a constriction in my throat.
Okay. And how is it, how's the lower back?
Lower back is fine right now.
Okay,
It,
so
it,
so
it moved.
it moved to the throat. Okay. And
Mhm.
on a 0 to 10, that constriction, what's that constriction like?
It's an 8.
Okay. And what's the emotion?
Oh, it's uh, it's a combination of anger and frustration at not having not being heard, not having a say in the staffing issues.
Okay. All righty. So let's go on the eyebrow point. All this frustration
All this frustration
on the side of the eye that I'm holding on to
that I'm holding on to
around the staffing issues.
around the staffing issues.
I wasn't heard.
I wasn't heard.
On the chin point, I wasn't listened to.
I wasn't listened to.
On the collarbone, I wasn't listened to.
I wasn't listened to.
Under the arm, it's so frustrating not to be heard.
It's so frustrating not to be heard.
Top of the head, I can feel that heaviness in my throat.
I can feel that heaviness in my throat.
On the eyebrow point, I just want to scream at them.
I just want to scream at them.
Side of the eye, can't you hear me?
Can't you hear me?
I'm talking to you right now.
I'm talking to you right now.
I want to be heard.
I want to be heard.
This is a huge issue.
This is a huge issue.
It is so frustrating you're not hearing me.
It is so frustrating you're not hearing me.
You're not listening.
You're not listening.
I am so frustrated and angry.
I am so frustrated and angry.
Eyebrow point, I'm trying to do my job.
I'm trying to do my job.
And I don't have the authority.
And I don't have the authority.
I have to come to you.
I have to come to you.
Why aren't you listening to me?
Why aren't you listening to me?
You need to listen to me now.
You need to listen to me now.
I am so frustrated and angry at you.
I am so frustrated and angry at you.
I'm so frustrated and angry at this establishment.
That's the key. Uh, a lot of hospitals have had to merge and or be sold, and it wasn't the management on the units as much as the management of the hospital that cut the staffing.
Mm-hmm.
And our managers and our charge nurses had no control over it. They had to work with what they had to.
Mm-hmm. And continue tapping as you talk.
Yeah.
So all this frustration and anger.
All this frustration and anger.
You're just not listening.
You're just not listening.
Have you not been on the floor lately?
Have you not been on the floor lately?
Maybe you need to come back and see the reality of it.
Maybe you need to come back and see the reality of it.
See what we have to go through every day.
See what we have to go through every day.
How you expect us to pull rabbits out of our hats.
How do you expect us to pull rabbits out of our hat?
And that's putting it nicely.
And that's putting it nicely.
You're not listening.
You're not listening.
I'm so frustrated
I'm so frustrated
and angry that I have to deal with these issues.
and angry that I have to deal with these issues.
This understaffing.
I didn't hear that one.
This understaffing.
This understaffing.
How am I supposed to provide optimal care
How am I supposed to provide optimal care
when there's such a lack of compassion?
when there's such a lack of compassion?
I'm so frustrated
I'm so frustrated
and angry
and angry
at this situation.
at this situation.
Taking a deep breath.
I just had a big shift, Sandy.
Wonderful. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it was about the compassion, the issue of the compassion.
Mm-hmm.
So it really dropped. My body responded with a yawn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard how good that how that was. Yeah.
Hmm. And I think where was I on all that? 8. I'm way down to a 2, 3.
Okay, on the frustration was it is a 2 or a 3? And how's
Yes.
your throat? How is your throat?
That helped it a lot. Uh,
Okay.
being just saying no compassion about our complaints.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm talking about all the nurses I worked with. It's still a 5.
Well, you were an 8.
Yeah. Okay. It's a 5. I
Okay.
mean, it went down to a 5, but it's still up there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And so, how's your lower back?
A little bit in the uh, in the lumbar area.
Okay, so that a little bit came back.
Yeah.
Okay. All righty. So is your 2 or 3 still the frustration and the anger?
Hmm.
Okay. All right. So let's do a tapping on your points.
Okay.
This
This
remainder frustration.
this remainder of frustration.
Side of the eye, this remainder frustration.
This remainder of frustration.
Under the eye, this remainder of frustration.
This remainder of frustration.
Under the nose, this remainder of frustration.
This remainder of frustration.
On the chin point, this remainder of frustration in my body.
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 Under the arm, this remainder of frustration in my body.
This remainder of frustration in my body.
Top of the head point, this remainder of frustration in my body.
This remainder of frustration in my body.
Eyebrow point, I choose to release this remainder frustration.
I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
Side of the eye, I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
Under the eyes, I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
Under the nose, I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
On the lip, I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
Collarbone, I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
Oh, I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
And every time Peggy yawns and coughs and whatever, that's the body releasing. I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
And then the top of the head, I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
I choose to release this remainder of frustration.
Okay. Taking a deep breath.
Oh,
Release.
pardon me, I usually don't yawn like that, but in public, but it's unavoidable. My body's just doing it.
Yeah, that's
Um,
wonderful. What's your 0 to 10 around the frustration?
it's down, it's 0.
Okay. And what about the lower back, the lumbar area?
Gone?
Okay. And what about your throat constriction?
Maybe 1.
Okay. All right.
Almost totally gone.
All righty. So what I'd like you to do with that, Peggy, is I'd like you to I'd like you to put your hand on your heart. I'd like
Okay.
to tap on the 9 gamut, which is right on the back of your hand. It's between your ring finger, your little finger, right between the
Uh-huh.
tendons here, and just tap. So put your hand over your heart. Okay, the cords are in the way. And I'd like you to look straight forward. I always close my eyes first, and then when I open my eyes, I'm looking straight forward. And then without moving your head, look down at the floor, and then slowly, it's called the 6-second eye roll. slowly roll your eyes up towards the ceiling, all the while thinking, releasing this remainder frustration. All the way back to the ceiling, and like you're going to put your eyes in your back of your head and then close your eyes. Taking a deep breath.
It's
And then
gone. It's
it's
gone.
gone. Okay,
Yes.
good, good, wonderful. Now, now this is something that came up was there was a shift to the compassion. I used the word compassion, and that brought something up. So that's a different aspect, or a, and we're running over a little bit, but I think it's a very important piece to remember is that you want to bring that frustration, that tabletop, and now compassion is a leg of that frustration. So, but it's also referred to as a different aspect of the frustration. So, what I would suggest is looking at compassion, um, identifying your 0 to 10 on that compassion or lack of, and then following you can do the replay and you can follow through what we did, thinking of the compassion issue and breaking that down. So, if a different aspect comes up, you identify that, you do your 0 to 10, then you identify where it resides in your body. What is the composition of it? Is it heavy? Is it painful? Is it stinging? Is it swirling? Whatever the feeling is. And then if you can put an emotion to that feeling, what would that be? And sometimes you can even put an intensity to that so you can go back and evaluate it. And again, no right or wrong on what your 0 to 10s are. Don't worry about if you're a 10 and you come down to a 9 or a 9.5. You've shifted in some fashion, and that is the important thing. One little caveat is that if you say you start out in you're a 10 or you're a 6 or you're a 5, but as you begin to tap and it goes up, continue to tap, bring that intensity back down to where you originally started or below, and then you can either move forward or you can stop, whatever you want to do. So just just curiosity on when you think of compassion, Peggy, is there any intensity around that or the lack of compassion?
No, it really that last round you did I'm just discharging like crazy,
Yeah,
yawning, yawning, yawning.
good.
But I must thank you because I have held on to that for over 10 years.
Yeah.
And this is really important, people, because any trauma that you have, whether you're the patient or the caregiver, dump your stuff. And I keep finding stuff that I didn't know I had. I mean, I didn't know it was that intense
Right.
thinking about it. I talk about it with my friends who I worked with, and they've got all that anger in them as well. And if
Hmm.
you're listening to me, I hope you dump your stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And we are over, and hope you've enjoyed the tapping and the discussion around nurses. Next week, we're going to be talking about the void of what happens when they're gone, whether your caregiving is done because the patient has been discharged or because the patient has passed away. As a family caregiver, what do you do when you're no longer the caregiver? My son actually moved on with his life and moved away, and so there's that void, and how do we fill that up? So I'd love to have you join us, come on the open discussion with us next week. Uh, and go over to survivingthediagnosis.com, uh, opt in for the reminder. And when you opt in, you'll also have the opportunity to say that you'd like to be live on the panel. And to be live on the panel, you will need a Gmail account. It's free. You can sign up anytime, and I'll send you the link. So just let me know. And I also would like to put a shout out to our sponsor for believing in our message, and that is Moira Hutchison. She is a certified clinical hypnotherapist, and she works with her company is the Hypnosis for Cancer Care, and she's a hypno chemo uh, practitioner. And I'd just like to thank Moira Hutchison for supporting our message of helping others who care for each other. And also, as always, to remember each week that you are not alone. We're here to support you, and that your dreams and your desires are always within reach. And you can choose to live in freedom and peace. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.